So, over the last year, the European Union has faced multiple serious crises in the fields of economy and finance, immigration and security. So, we would like to have your views as a person with a long experience in European affairs about the present state of the Union and its future. Looking in retrospect, how adequate and timely would you judge the reactions of the EU and its institutions to the three crises we have mentioned? Also, which have been the failures of the European institutions in this crisis, and which reactions and measures have been more positive?
The three crises are different in nature, but they've been very serious, and they have hit in a very serious manner the European Union and most of its member states, even though in a different manner and to different extents. Let's start with the economic and financial crisis, which has been probably the most challenging crisis the EU had to face in the last 10 years. My own judgment is that altogether the EU has reacted quite well, but probably not sufficiently well. A number of measures have been adopted, in most cases in emergency situations, which have had as a net result that of increasing the degree of integration and interdependence of our economies and on our financial system. Those measures have been made necessary by the remark that the economic and monetary union, as it had been originally conceived, was not sufficiently robust and sufficiently resilient. The crisis has challenged very seriously the resilience of the economic and monetary union as it had been originally conceived. So there was a need to improve our rules for fiscal discipline, and we did so with the adoption of the six-pack and later on the two-pack, a new revised Stability and Growth Pact. There was a need to create something completely new, an instrument to provide financial assistance to countries in need and vulnerable, and we did it with the ESM. And finally, there was a need to drastically review the way our banks had been operating so far until the crisis. And there comes the idea of a banking union with a single supervisory mechanism, with harmonized rules for bank resolution and with a single resolution fund. Was this enough? No, but at least what collectively we were able to achieve was to avoid the collapse of the euro. Now we are in a moment, in a situation where new reforms are needed to improve the resilience of the economic and monetary union and to improve the governance of the economic and monetary union. Migration is the second crisis which has been mentioned, and I think that there again the response of the European Union and of its institutions to the crisis has been twofold. My own judgment is that it has been, even though lately, but it has been sufficiently effective in dealing with what I would define the external component of the migratory policy of the European Union. The need to establish cooperative relations with countries of origin and countries of transit, the need to disburse financial assistance in order to be able to establish with those countries partnerships that are meant to improve cooperation in the management of migratory flows. But it has been much less than a success, I would say a failure, when it comes to the internal component of the migratory policy. The lack of solidarity which has emerged, in particular the refusal by many member states to accept even the principle of a modest relocation of asylum seeker, is the proof that what I would define again, as I said, the internal component has been very weak, if not completely absent. Security and defense and the role of the European Union in the national scene. There, I think our collective role as Europe has been rather modest. If you accept in the recent past the role played by the European Union and by the High Representative in the negotiations that led to the agreement with Iran for the control of the Iranian nuclear program, there are little progress that can be brought to the attention of our public opinion to show that the Union is actually able to perform a role in the international scene which is corresponded to its economic weight. There I see probably the wider scope of progress in the future, and I'm confident that on the basis of a new political determination, particularly the one which has appeared in the field of defense, the Union will be able in the future to improve its performance.
Well, during this period, significant centrifugal drives have become manifest in the Union. Brexit is obviously the most extreme case, but one should not forget the renewed appeals to national sovereignty expressed in many member states by some parties. In your opinion, how dangerous are these drives and how can the Union cope with them?
You mentioned Brexit, and I think that the lowest point in terms of popularity for the European Union coincided more or less with Brexit. And the worst year in the recent history of the Union has probably been 2016, with two events in Europe, Brexit, and in the United States, Trump, showing that populist forces were able to win, and to win quite significantly. Brexit has been an enormous trauma for the European Union, not only for the UK, and it still is. We are still trying to digest the consequences of Brexit. Trump has been probably a wake-up call for the Union. I would put it in more positive terms, because I think it has come to Europe as a warning that Europe should do it probably in most cases alone, not counting anymore with an ally which for too long has been given for granted. Now, what happened after 2016, and in particular in 2017, elections in France, later elections in Germany, and altogether a reduced weight of the nationalist populist forces are, for me, a reason for more optimism. Even if you look at the electoral campaign in Italy, the latest developments of the electoral campaign in Italy show a reduced or less impressive importance attached by some political forces to Europe in critical terms. No? Ideas like a referendum of the euro, or even the threat to abandon the Union and Italy exit are now absent from the political debate, which show that probably there is another awareness growing in most European countries that Europe is needed and Europe is necessary. This is not to say that we should not be vigilant and should not exclude a risk that anti-European forces, a populist narrative may come to surface again in the near future. But for the time being, I am more optimistic than I was a year ago.
Well, in these years, the issue of the European solidarity and of its legal and financial implications has been repeatedly evoked, particularly with regard to the economic and migration crisis. Do you see this as an important problem for the Union today?
Yes, it is, and it may continue to be in the future. But I would distinguish the case of the solidarity in the economic and financial areas from solidarity when it comes to, for instance, to the problem of the management of migratory flows. Solidarity in the economic sphere or the economic area has been invoked in particular by debtor countries. With requests that often have been interpreted by creditor countries as unacceptable because leading to moral hazard. And I think those that criticize the recourse to the principle of solidarity have some reasons that we should carefully take into consideration. You cannot pretend that Europe or something that belongs to Europe can always rescue or can always come to your rescue if you are not able to put your house in order, to put it very bluntly. So I think that in order to be able to manage for the future economic crisis, now we are not in the middle of the crisis, on the contrary, we're in the middle of a very positive period of time for our economy. we should be able to move in a concerted and balanced manner in the double direction where measures of risk reduction would accompany measures of risk mutualization. We cannot invoke risk mutualization measures unless we are also able to introduce and adopt a measure of risk reduction. On the question of solidarity and the application of the principle of solidarity to migration and migratory flows, I think this is a different story, because you cannot invoke the principle of solidarity when it's a question of requesting money, for instance, for your least developed regions, and refusing the principle of solidarity when it's a question of showing a bit of availability to something which is, frankly speaking, only symbolic. And I have in mind in particular the idea of a modest relocation of asylum seekers. This is something which I am sure will come to surface when we will have to rediscuss the future of the European Union budget very soon. And I'm aware that some governments, in particular the Italian government, is pushing very much for the introduction of a very special kind of conditionality on countries that receive a lot of money from the European Union budget based on the principle of solidarity, but are not actually available to show solidarity when it comes to policies that are of interest for other countries. So I think this is going to be a very hot subject in the near future, and in particular in the context of negotiations on the budget.
Throughout these years, the European Union has changed a lot. How positive or negative you judge these changes? And looking to the future, which are the crucial changes and improvements that you believe are needed for the EU to be ready to face the current and future challenges? And which are the conditions that might help with such developments?
Well, I think that I've always been a supporter of the principle of output legitimacy. And I've always thought that the success of the European project is mainly due to the fact that along the years, the European Union, and before the European Union, the European communities, have been able to demonstrate to national public opinions that the Union and the communities were able to deliver on public goods that were appreciated as such by the citizens, the European citizens, be it peace, be it the absence of conflict, be it economic development, or even the defense of the basic principle of democracy and rule of law. In the recent past, we have lost this because of many reasons, because of the nature of the new challenges, because of the enormous increase in the number of members, some of them not sharing the same sentiments of others. So there is a need for the European Union to recover its capability to deliver on public goods that are part of the expectations of the public opinions, where comes in particular security, which is probably number one preoccupation for our public opinions these days, comes economic development, growth, and employment, but also the idea that the Union could assist member states in affording and tackling problems that could not be otherwise solved or even afforded at national level. I'm thinking of the great challenges of an horizontal nature, like the fight against terrorism, the fight against climate change, or even the idea that globalization can be managed in much better terms by a group of countries united than by individual national member states alone. And the other big challenge lying ahead for the European Union has to do with the need to recover in terms of democratic accountability and legitimacy. Until the famous output legitimacy has worked, we had probably this problem of democratic legitimacy and accountability was less felt as such as a problem. Now that output legitimacy is put into question because of the complexities of the world and of globalization. I think that there is a lot that can be done and needs to be done to improve democratic legitimacy and accountability for the European Union. And the third question, which I think would also be crucial, is that of a better distribution of tasks between the European Union level and the national, or even the subnational levels of decision making. Too often our citizens have had the impression, right or wrong, that the European Union was intervening with measures, with regulations in areas and where probably regulations and measures could have been better adopted by national legislators or even subnational legislators.
Well, we are now at the end of our conversation, but we would like to conclude our interview with a not very simple question. How optimistic are you about the future of the EU?
I'm optimistic because I think that at the end of the day, reason will prevail, and even that politicians will recover their capability to explain complex things to their electors. One of the major problems which the European Union has suffered had to do exactly with the complexities of such a project, and with the temptation by many politicians, they have an impact on public opinion's orientations, to make things easier, often attributing the European Union responsibilities that have nothing to do with the Union, but a lot to do with national responsibilities. I see this trend reduce, and I'm confident that in particular the young generations in Europe, which have developed a European mind, in a sense, mindset, will be able to rediscover the advantages of being together and of working together.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.